Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Issei Has Sacred Heart and Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Marquita Condorcet suggested that all forms of education that can be conducted should be shared by everyone, said the high school student. He was standing and had an open textbook on his desk. He was seated next to the window, about halfway down the classroom's length. Also, according to Japan's constitution laws, all citizens have the right to receive education. I believe that the message this tells us is that discrimination against those with poor levels of education should not be allowed. He sat down, his classmates staring at him in bewilderment. That is all. There was a baffled pause. Issei, said the teacher, as confused as his pupils. What does any of that have to do with? Just now, Issei interrupted. You asked the class rep to answer the third problem in this book. And, ever since the beginning of the new semester you have only been asking a small percentage of the class, which coincidentally achieves the highest grades, to answer various problems. I should know. I've been observing you. Creepy, thought a good-looking boy at the back of the room, thinking the spectacle had nothing to do with him. He was wrong. And, asked the teacher again. This is prejudice, thundered Issei, slamming his fists on the table and making everyone jump. He pointed at the boy who had been snarking to himself earlier, and bellowed, "Why do you not give the chance to answer problems to that creature?" The boy's jaw dropped, brain not yet catching up with what was happening. I almost had a heart attack when I snuck a look at the teacher's notes. Issei continued. There was an absence of one digit that should definitely belong there. No, said the second boy, who had realized what he was talking about. Kiba's 2-digit IQ made me wonder if what we were doing could really be called a conversation between the same species. Even though Kiba's brain is flapping desperately like the dolphins of the Pacific, just because his IQ only reaches the level of 2 digits, his very right to be a student is rescinded. Is this fair, I ask you? Is this fair? He turned to the dolphin in question. Speak up, Kiba. Even if your stupid brain is on the same wavelength of an equally stupid fish, believe that you have what it takes to answer these pitifully simple maths problems. Kiba rose to his feet, calmly walked to Issei's desk and violently punched him in the face. He pointed at his bleeding classmate and with tears in the corners of his eyes, he shouted, "They told us that IC test was done casually." Don't make me laugh, smirked Issei, wiping the gore from his chin. I saw how super serious you were. Kiba recoiled, as though struck. What about you? You're barely on a 3rd digit yourself. You honestly believe my IQ of 3 digits is on the same pathetic level as yours? The teacher twitched, squeezing the chalk in his hand with ever-increasing severity. How dare you compare me with a fish? Dolphins aren't fish, dumbass, they're mammals. The chalk disintegrated. Later, Issei and Kiba sat in the hallway to which they had been banished. Issei's head was propped on one hand, while Kiba's was between his knees. How many times? Murmured Kiba. It was the voice of a broken man. How many times must you this to me before you're satisfied? Issei smirked, head not leaving his hand. Calling dolphins fish. I mean really. Drop it. Dumbass, of course your IQ would only be. I said drop it. Even later. Booyah, cheered Kiba, his mood having done a complete 180. This is the ultra-rare lunch set that only the first 2% of students to arrive at the cafeteria can get. The legendary sunny side up that hasn't been shattered. I can't believe that I would receive such a miracle due to detention. Perhaps this is providence. A reward for enduring your miserable existence for so long. Issei sat opposite, head once more in his hand. Deep down, Kiba wondered if they'd ever separated. If you think being overly descriptive will make up for your 2-digit IQ, then I'm sorry to say Kiba's chopsticks snapped in his hand. The duo were drawing a lot of attention, as they always did. Between them, they were indisputably the most famous male students at Q High. Kiba, with his slender frame, pale blonde hair and Bishonen good looks, was said to be the prince of the student body. Or at least he was when Issei wasn't around. Somehow the other boy always managed to pull him into his own pace, to the point where Kiba's more normal friends had given him a t-shirt the previous Christmas that had the words designated Tsukomi written on it. According to legend, he had cried after unwrapping it. Issei was a wild child. His uniform always looked as though he had slept in it. His brown hair was unruly and tangled, and wiry muscles were visible through his clothes. His eyes shone with mischief, and he always seemed to be brimming with energy and enthusiasm. It was ridiculous how much trouble he got into, and Kiba seemed to have made it his life's work to get dragged into it along with him. Every single time. But no matter what shit they got into, at least they would always be friends. I hate you, hissed Kiba. I loathe you. I despise you. Who decided I would be your butt monkey anyway? Me and Boke united. We had a meeting. Why me? Why me? Because you always just walk into it. No matter how obvious the setup is, you fall for it every time. I do not. They told us that IC test was done casually. Okay, but that was just one time. You know that Tsukomi shirt your club got you? How did you know about that? Was actually recommended by me. Those ink traitors. You're naive, Kiba, said Issei smugly. When 3 beautiful women give you an article of clothing as a holiday gift, it's obviously an invitation to strip off everything else and... Bah, that's the wishful thinking of a virgin, sneered Kiba. Huh, you mad? Issei raised an eyebrow. I am indeed a virgin, but at least I'm not as tender and insecure about it as you are. Kiba flinched, the words gouging into his soul. Well, be that as it may, it's normal for people our age to. Are you kidding me? Roared Issei, slamming both fists on the table. Kiba's tray jumped into the air and his egg wobbled dangerously, but ultimately remained intact. We are in our prime, our springtime of youth. No, he grabbed his chopsticks and held them aloft like a weapon. If a dumbass like you is to make his passage into adulthood, then he must show no fear, no hesitation, and strike to the heart of the. His voice faded away. At the climax of his speech, Issei had brought the chopsticks stabbing downwards, puncturing the sunny side up that hasn't been shattered. To Kiba, it was like watching his own heart explode into gooey, yellow chunks. Kiba, smiled Issei nervously, backing up slightly as the other boy rose ominously to his feet. Yudo, Fang Man, remember how you were just saying that we were friends and that you love me and how you'd never try and castrate me with a ladle. Elsewhere, the girl sat at an empty table. Though the idea was that her friends would eventually come and join her, the spare seats were immediately filled by a bunch of people she didn't know. Ria's one-sama ordered the brunch set again. I wonder what drink that is. Since it's one-sama, it must be a really expensive drink. It's just water. Wah, such an elegant posture. Move yo asses. Her table was flipped as someone crashed into it. Ria's was thrown from her seat, but a muscular arm looped around her back before she hit the floor. Her rescuer caught her tray with his free hand, then, in a remarkable display of dexterity, caught all of the falling food on top of it. He placed the food on the bench, then turned to look at her. Her face wasn't the first thing he noticed, but rather it was her long, crimson hair. Oh, said Issei. Hello again. Her drink finally descended and hit the younger boy squarely on the crown, causing him to drop her with a thump. Issei blinked, then ducked and rolled. Kiba landed acrobatically where he had just been standing, for some reason dual-wielding a pair of ladles. I'm sorry, Kiba, panicked Issei. I didn't mean to disturb your fragile two-digit. He shut up and ducked, barely avoiding the blow that whistled overhead. Wisely, he chose to flee. Get back here, you son of a bitch. Not the ladles. Anything but the ladles. Ria's just sat there on the floor, blinking in surprise. What? She said finally. The hell? After school. Dude, I said I was sorry. Do you think sorry brought Juliet back to life? Hermione, King Arthur, Humpty Dumpty. Fine, I'll buy you something with eggs on the way home. Will that make you feel better? Kiba stopped walking as they reached the front gate. Can't. I have club activities today. Issei gave him a disbelieving look. Seriously? Is there any day when you don't have? Oh, I see. See what? Asked Kiba warily. You need to spend time with your ladies. That's fine. The bro code dictates that I keep telling you it's nothing like that. Issei gave him a long look. Really? Seriously? Are you sure? I'm positive, yes. Wow. There was a brief pause. That makes me sad. You son of a. So you've never touched any of them? Kiba blinked, a little taken aback by the sincere surprise in his voice. No, never. Wow. Just, wow. Issei shook his head. You know, one of these days I'm going to join that club of yours and steal them all. Then I'm going to seduce any other hot female members that happen to join later, just to rub it in your face. Kiba rolled his eyes. Yeah, as if that'll happen. Irony loves this boy. The two said their goodbyes and parted ways, Kiba to the old school building and Issei to the road home. The path led him down a steep hill, which soon curved in a sharp turn. Still sloping downwards, the road curved in an arc, so that if Issei hopped over the railing and kept going, he would eventually hit the road once again. The way, however, was very, very steep. He took it at a run, vaulting over the railing and racing down the hill at full speed. Gravity multiplied his momentum, dirt and rocks kicked up in showers as his footsteps became ever rougher and more desperate. His lips stretched back over teeth that sharpened into a feigned grin, and his eyes flared green as his pounding heart pumped adrenaline through his body. Then he reached the road. Truly, it was a jump that a professional athlete could have been proud of. Using the low wooden fence as a foothold, he leapt through the air, twisting himself into a horizontal, high-jump-style reclining position to help make it over a passing bus. Issei managed to clear the adjacent pavement completely, crashing awkwardly into the peak of a high stone wall and flipping painfully onto the other side. He lay there for a moment, panting and still smiling, as his eyes returned to their usual brown. Then he heaved himself to his feet, rubbed them from his eyes, and started walking. He was in a park, by the way, not too far away. The nun squealed and tripped, her luggage scattering across the ground. She landed face first, so it took a few seconds for her to push herself up and rub the gravel from her eyes. When she looked up, however, most of her things had already been picked up and returned to their bag. Her savior was a tall Japanese man in his mid-teens, probably the same age as herself. He helped her to her feet, looked at her with those soulful brown eyes, and she realized she didn't speak a word of the local language. Issei cocked his head to one side. The nun had begun to babble in Italian, and didn't seem to notice that the items he was helping stuff back into her bags included several pairs of underwear. In fact, he doubted she'd notice if he stole a few for the memory, but in the end he decided not to in deference to her nunness. She was young, blonde, and very pretty, with large green eyes that widened adorably when he raised a hand for her to stop speaking. Issei, he said slowly, pointing at himself to indicate he was telling her his name. He repeated himself a few times until she understood. Asia, she replied, pointing to herself. He repeated the word experimentally, but it came out thickly accented and sounded more like Ashia. Issei performed an exaggerated charade of someone trying to find something and failing, and when Asia had stopped laughing she drew a crude image of a church in the dirt. Issei heaved her suitcase onto his shoulder, beckoned her to follow, and ended up the escort for a beautiful young girl. Life's funny that way. Before they left, Asia motioned for him to lean down and placed her hands on his cheeks. They were very soft and a little cool. A soft green light flowed from her fingers, and the little cuts and bruises left over from his earlier fall stopped hurting. So she could heal people. Huh. Asia withdrew her hands from the Japanese boy's face, shifting nervously. She hadn't intended to use her power so openly, really she hadn't, but she just couldn't stand the sight of someone in pain. People could generally be sorted into two categories, those who adored her for her powers and those who were afraid of her, or at least afraid of the unknown in general. Issei stood there a moment longer, rubbing his face thoughtfully, then pointed to his own eyes. They began to glow a prominent, unnatural green. He picked her up with one arm and hefted her onto the shoulder, not carrying her luggage, and set of it a run. In a dizzying series of acrobatics he jumped back and forth between two buildings, ascending higher and higher until they were on the roof. He set her down and pointed. They were at the edge of town, and where she looked Asia could see a sprawling vista of green fields, a glorious view of nature she had never before been privileged to experience, as she had spent most of her life in a stone-built city with limited freedom. She would later swear that her eyes literally drank in the sight, so strong was the emotion and so clear the recollection. When Asia finally tore her gaze back to Issei, he wasn't looking at the view but at her, a wild, roguish grin on his face, the sort of smile it's impossible not to smile back at. When she was ready to leave he motioned for her to get on his back, her knees gripping his waist and her arms looped intimately about his neck, and hefted her suitcase in his arms. Roof hopping is as fast as it is enjoyable, and they reached the church far sooner than Asia would have liked. She made an inquiring gesture, asking if he would like to come inside, but he waved his hand in an apologetic negative. On impulse she wrapped her arms around his waist, and he laughed and hugged her back. When they separated she had a small but pleased blush on her face, and as she ran into the church, one hand waving frantically at the departing Issei, she swore to herself she would learn Japanese as soon as possible. It was at this point that Issei realized he had forgotten his school bag back at the park. He would have retrieved it quickly as he made good time across the rooftops, but it seemed someone had been murdered in the time he'd been away. Whoever the victim was, they had been killed with a heavy, blunt object. The murderer had attacked the body over and over again until the corpse had been utterly pulverized. There were no recognizable physical characteristics left, nor were there any visible organs, bones, or even clothing. It was just a massive blur of red and pink and purple smeared across the pavement. Most frighteningly, it seemed the concrete itself had been unable to withstand the blows. Huge cracks and craters scarred the ground, and it seemed likely that large portions of the deceased had sunk into the gaps. Issei retrieved his bag, elbowed his way through the crowd, and left. Pale eyes watched him go. Later, at the Hayadu residence, Issei dumped his bag by the door and rolled his shoulders with a sigh. It had started raining on the way home, and he hadn't bothered to cover himself. The house was dark, and when he flicked on a few lights and went into the kitchen he saw a note stuck to the fridge. Apparently, his dad had thrown his back out and his mom had to drive him to the hospital. Issei frowned. Even his parents found it difficult to keep up with his wild behavior, and had registered him into a dormitory as soon as he hit high school. A part of Issei's mind that didn't see the light of day very often wondered if they just didn't want to see him. He slapped a sandwich together and plopped himself in front of the TV. The sun went down, and what little light remained disappeared. The rain intensified, developing into a full-blown thunderstorm. His parents called when the clock struck 7, saying the weather was too bad for them to make it back. The night dragged on. In the downstairs hallway was an antique grandfather clock. It was very loud, but the entire family had long developed the ability to sleep through its thunderous gongs. It was set so that it only rang twice every 24 hours, once at midnight and once at midday. Issei had actually missed it a little after leaving the house, so he stayed up in anticipation. The hours ticked by, the actual clockwork of the thing eerily silent. He watched the hour hand slowly move into position, and the minute hand was just about to hit 12 when lightning crashed from the sky, seemingly right outside the window. All electricity was cut off, and in the instant he was plunged into darkness, the grandfather began to roar. 12 furious bellows echoed through the house, and when they stopped, the house sounded even quieter than before. The continuous background hum that the household appliances usually emitted was absent, so that both sight and sound seemed to abandon him completely. Issei sat, eyes wide in the blackness, waiting for them to adjust. The doorbell rang, scaring the life out of him. The figure on his doorstep was small and shivering. As soon as she laid eyes on him, Asia threw herself into his arms, sobbing hysterically. Issei gently led her inside, weaving unsteadily down the dark halls to the bathroom. He grabbed a towel and tried to dry her off, but she resisted. The poor girl was babbling frantically, too distraught to remember that he couldn't understand her. If Issei could speak Italian, he would have heard reiterations of the words murderer and targeting holy maidens and saw you with me. But all he heard and all he saw was a distraught young girl, so he just smiled comfortingly and tried to calm her down. He felt a cold draft. A huge portion of the wall had disappeared. It wasn't as if it had been smashed inwards or had caved in naturally, but more like it had been utterly disintegrated. Issei began to back away, pushing Asia behind him. Someone was in the house. Now that he was tuned into it, he could taste them on the air. Masculine. Perhaps they had timed the blow to the wall to coincide with the sound of thunder. Perhaps they had been in the house from the beginning, watching from the shadows. As they passed a dark doorway, a huge fist reached out. Asia never saw it coming as it began to encircle her head with the intention of quickly squashing it into a fine pulp. Issei threw his arms around her and dragged her out the way, the intruder roaring in fury as his fist closed on empty air. A weapon, long, heavy and probably intended for two-handed use, came whistling towards them, and again Issei only just jerked them out of its path. As the monstrous instrument struck the ground, it ruptured, the floorboard shattering and a crater forming beneath from the sheer destructive shockwave of the blow. The assailant was very tall, so much so that Issei only came up to his chest, and unnaturally muscular. He was middle-aged, his hair long, matted and unruly. Stubble decorated his cheeks, and he was wearing a dirty gray coat along with an equally dirty set of pants and boots. In his hand was a sledgehammer. The handle was very long, and if propped on the ground it would reach as high as the man's shoulder. The head was perfectly cylindrical, and blacker than any natural metal had any right to be. The man hefted his hammer, this time with both hands, and attacked them once more. Issei threw Asia to the side and launched himself in the opposite direction, and the ground between them was pulverized into nothing. Before he could pull the heavy weapon back, Issei darted forward and kicked him solidly in the nuts. Though the big man only grunted in response, he could tell he had his attention. "Asia," he shouted as the murderer turned his way. "Run, run while I hold him off." "Wait, don't," she screamed back, but of course he didn't understand a word. He bolted through the gaping hole in the wall, and the hammer man tore after him. The gap led to the garden, rain still thundering from the heavens. The fence to the right had been smashed to pieces, but Issei ran straight ahead. He jumped as he neared the tall tree at the edge of the yard, used it as a springboard and leapt atop the fence, his balance perfect despite the slippery rainwater. He began to run along the narrow line of wood, and behind him the hammer man bowled directly through the fence. He didn't even use his hammer, but simply smashed the wood into kindling with brute strength alone. This was what Issei was counting on, or rather he was counting on the flying chunks of wood to obscure the madman's sight. As he kept moving, knowing that if he slowed down for even a moment he was done for, a second, even taller tree came into view. He leapt, eyes blazing green, and grabbed a hold of a high branch. He swung himself up and froze in a wobbly handstand. He watched as the lunatic passed beneath him and heard rather than saw his momentum carry him onwards, a fading bellow all that was left behind as he ran over the sheer drop their street was built on. Issei dropped to the ground and walked to the edge, curious to see the smashed remains of his assailant. The sledgehammer swung up, coming closer than ever before. If Issei's eyes had been brown, then he wouldn't have gotten away in time. The murderer, in a fit of cliché, had managed to grab a hold of a sapling sprouting from the cliffside, which was somehow supporting his full weight. As the head hit the ground, rock that had lasted for hundreds of years crumbled to nothing. The ledge turned to powder, and both of them fell into space. Issei had to admire the brute straightforwardness of the guy. Even with both of them tumbling to their deaths, he continued to wildly swing his weapon, spit flying like shrapnel as he filled the night air with bestial screams. Eyes glowing brighter than ever before, Issei kicked off the rock wall and winced as the hammerhead whistled past his ear. As the madman lost all control, Issei grabbed him by the hair, smashed him face first into the cliffside and kept him there for several seconds. A long rent was torn into the rock, several larger chunks breaking away and following them down before they broke apart once more. As the resistance finally became too much, they both bounced away. The madman rolled a few times, slowing his descent as Issei continued to fall. The hammer man regained his bearings and began to run down the cliffside even as Issei righted himself. He came in with his standard overhead swing, but misjudged his own speed. Issei slipped between his legs as he whistled past, only to slam into a falling lump of debris. The lunatic dug his feet into the walls as he fell, tearing a chunk of rock free that was long and jagged like a pillar. As he once more spat on the laws of physics and ran along its length, Issei felt his own platform rotate in the air. As the world righted itself, Issei jumped. Beneath him the madman did the same, using his black hammer to smash the boulder apart. Pulling his weapon back, the hammer man ran for 3 steps up the cliffside before jumping towards him once more. He slightly misjudged the range, and Issei managed to grab the shaft of his hammer, pull, and wrap his legs about his shoulder in a straight arm bar. Once more they rotated, so that the murderer would hit the ground first. Around the base of the hill ran a train track, and one such train happened to be passing just beneath them. They landed on the second-to-last car. The hammer man hit the roof back first, denting it heavily, while Issei was thrown free, rolling to the edge of the last car. For a moment his eyes were brown again, but then he looked up, saw the lunatic stir and flicked them back to green. He jumped over the bigger man at a run, and soon heard the roars of pursuit resume once more. Issei sprinted at full throttle along the train's length, and saw ahead that the frontmost car had already turned a corner. The track was raised up high like a very long bridge, and straight ahead he could see the upper windows of a tall, high-class apartment block. Madness breathing down his neck, Issei jumped into space. He barreled through the 4th-floor window, rolled to keep his momentum, then kept on running. Meanwhile, Ria stepped out of the shower with a pleased sigh, rubbing the towel over her hair. A few droplets hung tantalizingly from her pristine body, and her gorgeous legs carried her swaying hips to her bedroom. She removed the towel, allowing her crimson hair to fall down her back, then wrapped it about herself and tied it at the chest. Yudo was becoming an issue. Admittedly, his abilities and composure were unaffected so long as that friend of his wasn't around, but when he was then shit would hit the fan. Issei was uncontrollable, a wild card. He was Yudo's best friend, so she had spoken to him on a few occasions. It hadn't taken her long to notice something that Yudo appeared to have missed entirely. Issei Hayadu positively stank of dragon. It wasn't like he was a dragon, or descended from a dragon, or even used a dragon-based sacred gear. The theory was that, though certainly possessing such a gear, Issei had yet to activate it. Instead, he had instinctively attained a form of preliminary activation, giving him a dragon's aura and all the perks that came with it. If she was correct, then Issei was a genius among sacred gear users. Rias would look back on this thought and laugh. The sound of glass shattering was the first indication that something was wrong. As she turned to look at the bedroom door, a brown-haired blur darted through, tackling her across the room. When they landed, his body was wrapped intimately around hers, one arm around her waist, one hand across her mouth, and his legs tangled with her own. Before her brain could process what was happening, he had rolled them both under the bed, holding her tightly to his chest and whispering in her ear, "Don't make a sound." Someone heavy strode into the room, snarling unintelligibly. Ria's apartment was extremely high class, and the picture frames alone were worth millions. Pictures, mirrors, cupboards, and even poorly placed sections of wall were all torn apart as the second man rampaged through her home. Rias could see the chunks of masonry hit the floor. Then the first man leaned back, and she saw his face for the first time. "You stay here," whispered Issei, "while I distract him." He edged out from under the bed, stood up, shouted a few profanities at the second man, and then took off once again, the second man howling at his heels. Rias emerged once they were gone, still clad only in a bath towel, and gazed upon her destroyed home. "What?" she said finally. "The hell?" In the hallway, Issei skidded about a corner, losing valuable seconds on his hunter. The halls were softly carpeted and unsuitable for running. This particular stretch ended in a window, and on the other side was. Oh, this was gonna be awesome. A fat man in a dressing gown stepped out of a door ahead, a solid gold cigarette case in his hand. Issei snatched it up as he raced past, then threw it as hard as he could. The window shattered, and Issei leapt through. The apartment block stood next to a construction site, a tall building barely halfway done. While the bottommost floors were passable, less and less work had been done as one went upwards, until the top 5 floors were a mere skeleton of steel beams. Next to the site stood a huge crane, unmanned, carrying a single girder suspended by a steel cable. This girder, it so happened, hung just outside a window on the 4th floor. Issei's feet hit the girder, he grabbed the cable to cancel his momentum and winced as the friction burned his palm. Like a monkey, he scrambled up the thin line before swinging himself up onto the crane's neck. The hammerman roared and jumped, the girder swinging dangerously as the much heavier man landed. Knowing he had mere moments before the lunatic regained his bearings, Issei began to wildly punch the metal he knelt on. Eyes blazing with more draconic energies than ever before in his life, Issei managed 4 punches with each fist before they were crushed into a white pulp. It was enough, however, and the metal was bent so violently out of shape that it gave way, the combined weight of the hammerman and the girder causing the tip to tear off completely. Unfortunately, he'd underestimated the reflexes of the murderer. Even as he fell, he grabbed the cable, swung it in a circle, and hurled it at the crane's neck like a lasso, and Issei was forced to roll backwards to avoid being crushed. As he almost fell off the awkward surface, the lump of mangled metal swung twice about the crane's neck before locking firmly against one of the many irregular nooks. With one tremendous heave, the murderer hauled himself up, grabbed onto the crane, and clambered to safety. The chase was on once more. Issei ran down the crane, and this time the madman ran so close behind him he could feel the displaced air as the sledgehammer whistled past his head. As they reached the crane's body, he jumped without hesitation, landing unsteadily on the topmost beams of the half-finished building. The top level was held up by 4 pillars, one at each corner. The level itself was in the shape of a capital H, and Issei found himself on the beam that formed the connecting line. As he desperately forced himself to stop, Issei found that H was all he had. There was nowhere left to run. The beam shook as a second body landed at its end, and Issei slowly turned to face it. The building was not approved by everyone involved, and a huge crowd of protesters had gathered at its base. There were police to keep the crowd under control, construction workers trying to get to their job, landowners there to make a statement, and even a few reporters to add to the general chaos. The crowd saw everything, from the moment Issei burst through the window to the face-off at the building's peak. Everything, from start, to finish. The hammerman was walking slowly now, sledgehammer steady in his hands. He didn't need to rush. There was no escape, and they both knew it. Not to mention Issei's hands had been mangled into unidentifiable lumps. That was going to sting later. For now, though, the adrenaline was still thick in his system, and survival was more important than pain. They met in the middle, and the weapon sang through the air. He was fast, but Issei was faster, ducking and weaving around the blows. Curiously, the madman was avoiding the overhead strikes he had favored before now. It took Issei a moment to realize why. In a pause in the onslaught, Issei darted forward and kicked him in the shin. He would have gone for the side and tried to knock him off, but he probably would have lost his balance and followed. Over and over again Issei struck, aiming to enrage rather than to injure. He succeeded. Effortlessly Issei backstepped, and the hammer struck the metal beneath. Like a twig, the girder snapped. It had to be done perfectly. First was Issei's right foot, placed on the head of the hammer to prevent him from raising it up. Using it as a step he moved forward, placing his left foot on the murderer's shoulder. Twisting his body, he pushed off with his left leg and jumped the way he came, causing the bigger man to stagger back slightly. By this point the beam had collapsed inward, and the path was slanted heavily. Issei ran 3 steps up the falling metal, then jumped once more. Lacking functioning hands, Issei was forced to throw his forearms over the beam ahead. His elbows screamed and what was left of his hands scraped agonizingly against the edge, but he held on. He was safe. Below him, the madman fell through space. In the fog of lust that clouded his thoughts, he saw his prey make it to safety. Putting every ounce of strength and willpower into the throw, he hurled his hammer as hard as he could. He missed, and hit the beam a few inches too far to the left. But it was enough. Again his support crumbled, and this time Issei had no way to save himself. The world spun, and he was dimly aware of bouncing off a few things as he fell. This was probably a good thing, as it reduced his velocity sufficiently that he survived. He still blacked out for a few seconds, but hey, who gets everything? Issei gasped as he jolted back into consciousness. Everywhere hurt, which was good. It meant everything was still attached. He sat up, blinked, and looked around. He was on the bottom floor of the building, dark and empty. It appeared to be a cafeteria, and several tables and chairs had been thrown about as he hit them. A few feet away sat the maniac who had chased him across half the city, his clothes even dirtier than before. He was just sitting there, staring blearily ahead. He turned and met his eyes. The man's eyes were pale, tired, and very, very surprised. There was a crash and the hammer landed between them, head embedding in the ground. They looked at the hammer, looked at each other, then looked up. On its way down the hammer had bounced off several walls and girders, and Issei had seen enough of the incredible weapon to know that whatever it hit was destroyed utterly, only powder left behind. Like an avalanche, tons and tons and tons of steel and masonry came crashing down towards them. Exhausted from the long chase, both of them could only sit and watch. Just before the rush reached them, as the collapsing mass blocked out all light, Issei heard the other man whisper 3 words. "Oh, thank God." There was a crash, screams, then silence. The man encountered by Issei Hayao last night was a serial killer with the alias of Crushing Hammer amongst the human constabulary, began Rias. She was sitting at her desk in the Occult Research Club room, reading off of a sheet of paper holding the information gathered by her familiar. Kiba sat on one of the chairs to her left, his head down and his hands curled into balls on his knees. Opposite him sat Aquino and Kaneko, who were looking at him in concern. Officially he was a construction worker who simply lost his mind, killing everyone at his workplace with a company-issued sledgehammer before doing the same thing to his own family. He then traveled the country through unknown means and committed over 200 similar acts with the same murder weapon, primarily targeting females with a religious background. These offenses were purely violent, with no indications of theft or rape at any of the known crime scenes. Here she paused, gave Kiba a last, concerned look and picked up a second sheet. Unofficially, he came into possession of a strange artifact that emerged in Europe just under 50 years ago. Both before and after its discovery it had been melted and reforged many times, implying that the material rather than the object itself was what made it unique. The most recent form taken by the artifact was the hammer used as the killer's murder weapon. Regardless of its shape, the artifact is always in possession of at least 2 documented abilities. Foremost is the power of destruction. Though I say that, it is in no way the same as my own powers. While my own abilities are more along the lines of antimatter, the artifact simply disassembles its target at a molecular level. In its current form, the effect is achieved by striking the intended object with the head of the hammer, but there have been alternate means with its previous forms. The second documented attribute is the irrational madness it eventually begins to inspire in the wielder, which always takes the form of omnimalevolent lust. Initially this drives the recipient to attack all around them, but after prolonged influence they begin to target holy maidens, or rather human females with supernatural ties to a benevolent religion. In Issei Hayao's case, for instance, he was seen interacting with one such holy maiden by pure coincidence. Rias trailed off awkwardly, then carefully placed the info sheet back on her desk. She looked at Kiba one more time before clearing her throat. She psyched herself up for what came next. As for Issei's current condition, well, Issei, whispered Kiba, the first words he'd spoken in a while. He's dead, isn't he? He balled his fists even tighter, and his whole body started to shake like a leaf. He's dead, and he's never coming back. Kiba's voice was choked with emotion. His eyes were clouded with tears. He couldn't form coherent thoughts due to his tumultuous emotions, and his nose was starting to run in a particularly undignified manner. So distraught was he that he didn't notice as the curtain on the club room's built-in shower was drawn back. Issei sat up from the tub where he had apparently been sleeping. He blinked blearily before lifting his arms in a luxuriant stretch, his yawn massive but silent. He was wearing the same clothes he was brought there in, which meant they were caked in filth, but otherwise he didn't have a scratch on him. He noticed there were other people in the room and began to lift himself from the bath. I said things, Kiba continued. Things I didn't mean. Issei stepped up behind him, but still he didn't notice. I told him I hated him, that I wished I didn't know him. But I didn't mean it, and I wish I could tell him how I really feel. Issei raised an eyebrow, then began to lean on the back of his chair as he settled in to listen. Akino was struggling to hold in a smile, while Kaneko was steadfastly staring at the door to help her friend retain his dignity. Riaz had picked her cheat sheet back up so she could hide a smirk of her own. There are so many things I want to tell him, like how he was the best friend you'd ever had, said Issei encouragingly. How he was the best friend I'd ever had, sobbed Kiba. And how I always appreciated what he brought into your life. Appreciated what he brought into my life, agreed Kaiba, the tears now freely flowing. Into everyone's lives, said Issei nostalgically, and Kiba nodded in agreement. He did that, Kiba managed, before erupting into fully fledged howls of grief. By this point Akino, Riaz and even Kaneko were holding their shoulders, quivering with suppressed mirth. If only I'd told him that I always loved him, pressed Issei, somehow managing to keep a straight face. Yeah, how I always loved him, even though he was obviously straight, even though he was obviously and positively overflowing with masculinity, and positively. Kiba was no longer crying. His back was ramrod straight, his arms by his sides and his face an emotionless mask. Though his eyes were red and puffy, they were now completely dry. Slowly and deliberately he rose to his feet, before turning to face his suddenly living friend. Issei held his gaze for several seconds before breaking out into a smile. I believe in miracles. He began to sing, dancing a goofy jig to go with it. UYHRK, you bastard, snarled Kiba, lunging over the chair to fasten his fingers about the other boy's throat. They, along with the chair, crashed to the ground. You utter bastard. He started to slam Issei's head against the ground, quite overcome with rage. Akino had lost all semblance of composure and was laughing hysterically while holding her ribs. Riaz was snorting over and over again into the hand covering her mouth, and even Kaneko was beginning to vibrate from suppressed hilarity. You traitors, Kiba screamed. I know that you just tried to kill me and all, Issei began. But I'm going to forgive you, because I know that deep down you'll always. Shut up. A particularly adorable snort echoed throughout the room. Kaneko, shouted Kiba, the look of one who has been betrayed by the one they trust most on his face. You, of all people. Yuyuro, interrupted Issei. Thanks, I'm glad that you're glad that I'm alright. Kiba's scowl shifted, and for a moment it seemed as though he had calmed down. Wait a minute, said the Bishonen suddenly. Why are you here? Weren't your hands squished? And didn't a building fall on you right afterwards? Half a building. Whatever. Yuyuro, said Riaz calmly, having finally gotten a hold of herself. This is what I was going to tell you before you. Her lips twitched treacherously. Interrupted. Issei is my new pawn. He's one of us now, which means I'm going to live as long as you, Fang Man, said Issei cheerfully, slapping Kiba on the back as a look of dawning horror came over his features. We're going to be together forever and ever. Here, Issei made his face as creepy as he possibly could. And ever. N-O-O-O, screamed Kiba, hurtling for the window. I don't want to live anymore. There was a sound of glass shattering, and he was gone. Dumbass, snorted Issei. This is only the second floor. Sure enough, his broken rant soon started up again, fading slowly into the distance. Please tell me someone filmed that. Kaneko raised her phone with one hand. Can I have a copy? She brought up her other hand and gave him a thumbs up. Awesome. He turned to acknowledge the rest of the room. I know I haven't officially joined the club yet, but I just know I'm going to love working with all of you. He saluted cheerily. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm not quite done torturing Kiba. He leapt heroically through the broken window and was gone. Later, the same day, and in conclusion, Issei was saying, the class rep is obviously an undercover spy. He knows what's amazing, said Kiba, looking like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That isn't the dumbest thing I've ever heard you say. They were sitting in the cafeteria, across from one another, and were each tucking into a generic school lunch. Issei had stopped by the locker rooms while the football team was busy, and swapped his own filthy uniform for a relatively clean one that was thereabouts his size. Not wanting to leave the owner in an embarrassing position, he had considerately left his own clothes as a replacement. They had his name on the tag, so he'd probably see them again. Have you seen the food he eats? I've never felt the need to check, no. That right there is the food that New Yorkers can't get enough of, the mighty Egg Benedict. It hasn't become popular in every corner of Japan yet, but it's a dish that many of the rich bitches that hang out on the high streets consider to be a high-tier brunch menu item. Indeed, it was first time I had ever witnessed such a delicacy in our humble backstreets. You sure know a lot of useless stuff, don't you? Said Kiba wryly. Also, our school isn't in the backstreets, and the Egg Benedict isn't a delicacy. The point is, Issei forged onwards, that he is deceiving us with that shitty lunchbox he brings to school each day. So, shrugged Kiba, some would argue that the idea of a prince attending a commoner's school is pretty cool. Cool my ass, shouted Issei, and they both ducked as all eyes turned to them. Of course, this only served to draw even more attention than they were already receiving. Steel yourself, my effeminate friend, for today I shall uncover that worthless, deceiving crap's true identity. Is this really how you should be recovering from debilitating, life-threatening injuries? Yes, nodded Issei. Kiba sighed, and Issei knew he was in. Elsewhere, Asia felt sick with guilt. She'd been unable to sleep since she had watched that poor young man get chased into the night by a man who had originally been after her. Since she had no access to news of any kind, she had no idea how big a farce that particular escapade had ended in, which meant she could only worry herself sick wondering what had happened. So imagine her surprise when, upon taking a walk a few days later, she saw that same boy hiding behind a trash can with a second, slightly thinner boy while spying on a third, rather ordinary-looking boy who didn't seem to have noticed them at all. "What on earth are you doing?" she asked before she could stop herself. Said Issei. "Oh, Asia, hi." Kiba blinked as he caught sight of her, suddenly remembering what Rias had told them about the targeting of holy maidens. "Issei-san," blinked Asia. "You can speak Italian?" "I can, yes," nodded Issei, who had already been told about the translation spell. "I just pretended I couldn't for the novelty." It was sad, but Kiba could totally see him doing that. "How are you? Last time we met you were." "Oh, I'm fine, yes," Asia gasped, suddenly remembering what she had been agonizing over just a few seconds ago. "Are you okay?" "That man was. He chased me into an abandoned building, knocked out the supports with his hammer and crushed us both. He's dead, but I have a pretty good doctor, so." He enjoyed her shocked face for a moment before nodding towards Kiba. "This here is my wingman, Uedo Kiba. He prefers it when you call him Kiba." "I do not," said Kiba, but there was no heat in his voice. "Hello, nice to meet you." "Ah," gasped Asia, and performed a clumsy curtsy. "Nice to meet you. My name is Asia Argento." She peered at them both curiously. "Why are you wearing sunglasses?" "When tailing someone, you should always come equipped with the bare essentials," nodded Issei sagely, and Kiba facepalmed with a sigh. "I have a third pair. Wanna join us?" "Why do you have a third pair?" Kiba's Tsukomi was just a bit too loud, and the class rep turned to see what all the noise was about. All three of them ducked behind the trash, and Issei knew the nun was in. Later. "Where did he go?" hissed Issei. "Into that cafe over there," Asia whispered back, peeping over her sunnies. The cafe in question was from a classy American chain that none of them could pronounce the name of, and all three of them were eyeing it while hiding conspicuously around the corner. "From our recent findings," Issei began, in what Kiba liked to call his bullshitting voice, "it's natural to assume he's the typical pervert who goes into cafes like that to sit and drink coffee. He's likely the type to shoot sneaky perverted glances from left to right while hiding behind a book. The way you explain it, I'm starting to dislike him too," admitted Kiba. "What now? As the saying goes, to hunt a tiger, you must venture into its lair." "Hey, that place looks stupidly expensive." Murmured Asia nervously. "Nuns don't get paid, you know." "Bah, it's just a slightly classier family restaurant," snorted Issei dismissively. "You're hungry, aren't you?" said Kiba finally. "You doing all this just so you can get an egg benedict?" "So what if I am?" said Issei, not even trying to deny it. "A building fell on me, dude." This was true. "Fine," Kiba sighed. "As a wise man once said, the man who wins is the man who tries." "Wisdom," nodded Issei, and took the lead. "Guys," called Asia plaintively, "I really have no money to speak of." Inside, when the class rep came to their table dressed as a waiter, their thoughts varied. "DAFUQ, class rep works here. How many zeros are next to this price tag?" "What do you mean they don't have an egg benedict?" You can guess which is which. Of course, though they still had their sunglasses on, the class rep still recognized them. "Aren't you from my class? Why are you here?" "To eat, of course," said Issei calmly. He wasn't a fool, and he knew they couldn't afford anything on the menu. So he decided to rectify the situation the only way he knew how, by making a scene. "What would you like?" "The usual," said Issei smoothly. "And the usual is..." "What the..." thundered Issei, bringing his fists down hard on the tabletop and scaring the shit out of his friends. Immediately, all eyes were on them. "The employees here don't even know what a frequent customer eats." "Shit, I'm getting the out of here. Come on guys, let's blow this joint." It probably would have worked if the manager hadn't been there. "What the hell is going on over here?" She was a tall, attractive but severe-looking woman, with short black hair, tight-fitting black jeans and a pink dress shirt. The class rep explained what had happened while the three of them sat in dread. "I see, so these customers are..." As the manager gave the troublemakers her most intimidating glare, her gaze homed in on Asia. The little blonde nun was drooping miserably, her large, moist eyes beaded with restrained teardrops at the corners and her fragile frame racked by the occasional sniffle. The manager imagined a set of small yellow dog ears atop her head, flattened repentantly against her skull. "Right," she nodded brightly. "To make up for my slave's mistake, this meal is on me. Eat whatever you like." She gave Asia a fond pat on the head, like that one skittish pet whose shyness makes it everyone's favorite. The three boys stared as she left, then turned to the equally confused Asia. "We're bringing her here again," murmured Kiba. "Agreed," nodded Issei. Said the class rep, who was totally out of his depth. "Would you like to order now?" In a rare moment of unity, the two boys shared a look. "Sirloin steak." "Right." "Cajun salad." "Got it." "Carbonara spaghetti." This carried on for a while. Some time later, sighed Asia cutely, leaning backwards with her hands folded on her stomach. "Good food," acknowledged Kiba, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin. Edible, agreed Issei, one arm tossed over the back of his chair as the other ran a toothpick over his teeth. At first Asia was against taking advantage of the manager's kindness. Then she tasted the carbonara. So your class representative's food, purred the blonde happily, was just leftovers from his part-time job. Yeah, murmured Kiba, eyeing his friend out of the corner of his eye. Issei, how are you coping? With what? Issei frowned. With the he glanced surreptitiously at Asia. With the surgery you got after the accident. It was fairly life-changing. Well yeah, Issei replied slowly. I was surprised, at first. Surprised, echoed Kiba, not shocked or terrified or incredulous, not horrified or disgusted or repulsed. Asia began to wonder what sort of surgery he'd had. Not particularly, he shrugged. I mean, this is who I am now, so I may as well deal with it. It's not like I've become a different person, or like I'm crippled. And you have to admit, I was pretty abnormal to begin with. This was true. Kiba, like anyone else who had known Issei for any length of time, knew about his green-eyed mode. Considering how Issei must have had to deal with his natural differences to the rest of the human race completely on his own whilst growing up, it kind of explained his adaptability. Issei-san, asked Asia innocently, what kind of surgery did you have? They both froze. Now there was an awkward question. Luckily they were saved from answering, as the entire boys' football team of Q High came bursting through the front door. Asia, said Issei, quickly leaning forward to clasp her hands with his. It's been nice seeing you again. We should do this again sometime. She managed, before a particularly thuggish newcomer stomped over and snagged Issei by the scruff of his neck. Phew, he snarled, like the word was a curse. You're Issei Hayato. You've heard of me, beamed Issei, seeming pleasantly surprised. You swapped our uniforms. The other boy roared. I did? Yeah, you're just going to admit it. Like it wasn't covered in. It's because it was covered in that I swapped it for yours. Issei pointed out. What did you do? Murder someone? I was attacked by a serial killer, actually. Behind him Asia was looking more and more alarmed by the minute, but Kiba was just facepalming repeatedly. Asia-san. Yes, she squeaked. It looks like my partner over there, he nodded at the throng of sportsmen, is intent on picking a fight. You should leave, or you'll get caught in the collateral damage. He paused, then smiled softly. But it has been nice meeting you. We should do this again. As Asia hurried to the door, the last thing she saw as she looked over her shoulder was Kiba, casually strolling towards the brawl to be as though he'd done it 1,000 times before. That night, and as I was walking down the street I looked back, Asia was saying. And one of the big men was just hurled through the front window like it was nothing. Damn, nodded Meidelt, the youngest fallen angel on the premises and the one she was telling the story to. We should recruit that guy. A tall man in a trench coat appeared at the door. Asia, report to Kalawana. You've been assigned a partner. Yes, sir. She nodded quickly and hurried from the room. The man looked at the little blonde goth lowly and said, and you, Lady Ryanair wants to see you. But Donna Siege, she whined. No, Donna Siege snapped. They were in the bowels of an abandoned church at the edge of town, the very one where Issei had dropped Asia off the other day. In one of the darker rooms Meidelt found her superior, a fallen angel with long, dark hair. Is the healing maiden settling in? Quite well, yes, nodded Meidelt. Ryanair was standing next to a massive, intricate drawing that had been chalked out on the ground. It consisted of 12 concentric circles, drawn in layers. At points on the clock, each circle had a hoop at its edge with a black chain threaded through. The chains came together to bind the shaft of the weapon sitting in the center of the magic circle. A two-handed sledgehammer balanced on its head, a head darker than any night. A pillar of demonic red energy blasted into the sky. The thick cloud cover overhead was blown away, and chunks of rock and other debris were scattered by the shock wave. From the crater left behind, a dark figure began to rise. HM. Hey ha ha ha. The figure screamed maniacally. At last, I am free. Free to ravage the world once more. Now that I have regained my full powers I shall wipe humanity from the face of the earth, starting with this pathetic town. Not so fast. The devil turned his head. His nemesis stood atop a nearby building, his battle raiment fluttering gallantly in the wind and enhancing his already imposing figure. Your reign of terror ends today, the hero declared. No more lives shall be lost to your evil, no more innocents shall suffer at your hands. Today, good shall triumph once and for all. Foolish mortal, sneered the devil. You know not of what you face. I shall sunder your flesh and drink your soul shall become my eternal plaything whilst your bones shall be made into a monument, a reminder forevermore of the fate of those who oppose me. Your life and your world ends here. Off screen, Kiba began to wonder if maybe they were taking this a little too far. My life is unimportant, declared the hero dramatically. If with my suffering, with my pain, I can allow my planet to survive just a second longer, he swept his hand to the side. Then I shall die without any regrets. His jumped into the air, preparing his right fist for a punch as he fell. NYOO. The villain's eyes flashed green, and he answered the hero's attack with a left hook of his own. As their fists met, the ground ruptured, contorting the already impressive crater into a jagged wound in the earth. The resulting shock wave took the form of a destructive wind, sending cars, fences, and poor, innocent Kiba hurtling into the next block. Later, in the clubroom. So, said Riaz, fighting back a smile. How did it go? Kiba looked like a broken man, that is to say, more so than usual. His blazer was missing and his shirt was torn. One trouser leg was missing and his normally immaculate hair was a mess. Streaks of dirt covered his face and he had a cold, dead look in his eye that Rias hadn't seen since they had gotten him his Tsukomi shirt the previous year. Issei, on the other hand, looked even worse. His clothes were naught but burnt rags, bruises covered his exposed abdomen and he had a cut that constantly leaked into his right eye, forcing him to keep it shut. He had the same look on his face that Ria's cousin had whenever he'd just beaten up his little brother. "I had fun," said Issei cheerfully. "Send me to see that guy again. Please, tell me I only had to supervise his first request," groaned Kiba, slumping down into a chair. Akino openly giggled at his suffering. "What did he ask for?" "He wanted me to turn him into a magical girl," smirked Issei. "So I fed him some bull about training for the day when he became worthy." He looked down at himself, noting the faint smell of carbonized hair. "Can I use your shower?" "Go for it," nodded Rias. "I thought something like this would happen, considering what usually happens when you and Kiba are in the same room, so I prepared fresh uniforms for the both of you." "Awesome," grinned Issei, disappearing behind the shower curtain. The old uniform was too big anyway. Belonged to some dude on the football team. The few, charred pieces of cloth that remained were flung out from behind the curtain, where they fluttered gently to the ground. "Remind me later to return it." As the sounds of running water filled the room, Rias made a mental note to ask for a full report on Issei's first request later. It was probably hilarious. "Yudo-senpai, your tea." Kaneko earned a smile as Kiba accepted his tea, finally perking up as he sipped the life-giving liquid. "Yudo," said Rias, as a thought suddenly occurred to her. "Where's the payment?" His face went blank. "Payment? You don't need to worry about that," called Issei, still in the shower. Miltan slipped it into Kiba's back pocket when he wasn't looking. The way Kiba shuddered when he heard this made Rias wonder what sort of person had contracted them. The water stopped. "Could someone pass me my clothes, please?" Kaneko pulled a folded boy's uniform out of a drawer and held it out next to the shower curtain. "No peeking," said Issei teasingly, but Kaneko just scowled in response. "I think the two of you have had enough excitement for one day," smiled Rias. "Why don't we leave it at that, and try again tomorrow?" The shower curtain slid open, and Issei, clean, clothed and still bleeding, stepped out. "Right, about that thing you told me about, where more than one evil piece can be used when someone is extra valuable, and how I have that sacred gear." Twice critical," said Akino helpfully. "Yeah, that thing." He nodded, as Kiba stepped into the shower behind him. "Does that mean I took more than one pawn piece?" "Actually, no," admitted Rias. "Usually having any sacred gear means 2 pawns at the least, but you only used 1. "Really?" blinked Issei. "Really?" repeated Kiba, sticking his head out of the shower. "It turns out the synchronization rate between you and your sacred gear is the lowest ever recorded. In fact, it's so bad that the gear has been leaking draconic radiation into you since birth, causing you to physically and mentally resemble a dragon." "He has a dragon's personality," frowned Kiba. "So that's why he's so unbearable." "So you're saying I'm so weak, I've looped back to strong." "Kinda, yeah." "Score," cheered Issei, flinging his hands into the air. "My awesomeness remains intact." Realizing this wasn't something he could make fun of him for, Kiba sighed and withdrew back into the shower. "The weakest user of the weakest dragon-based sacred gear. Underdog. They should call you the Underdragon." "Wisdom," nodded Issei proudly. They were stopped from further discussing how epic he was by a tentative knock at the door. "Excuse me," said Tsubaki Shinra. "I have a message from the Student Council President." Quick as a cobra, Issei reached out with one hand and pulled back the shower curtain. There was a brief, shocked silence before 2 girlish screams filled the air. Kiba frantically covered himself as Shinra fled from the room, but other than the two of them no one else seemed particularly surprised. Later, in the gymnasium. "While I appreciate the fact that you may be somewhat displeased by my earlier conduct," said Issei reasonably, "don't you think this is a little harsh?" Kiba had hung the pawn from the gym ceiling by a length of chain, which went right around his torso and bound his hands behind his back. The chain was very long and the roof was very high, so the effect was really quite impressive. "You degenerate, traitorous, fetid little reptile," snarled Kiba, who was actually a lot calmer than he was earlier. "Why do you do these things to me? Why do you feel the need to fill my life with suffering, to drag me with you on your downward spiral? Why? Answer me, you prick." "I do it because it's funny," declared Issei heroically. "I regret nothing." Kiba cast a shadowed look at the rest of his peerage. "Nobody help him, or I'll set myself on fire in protest." "That sounds awesome. Quick, get me down." With a frustrated scream, Kiba flung his hands in the air and stormed outside. Rias and her 2 remaining henchmen looked awkwardly at their newest club member, who was gently swinging from side to side. Would you like us to?" "No, that's fine," said Issei dismissively. "I would be disrespectful to Kiba's efforts if I didn't break free on my own." "I don't understand," admitted Kaneko. Issei pursed his lips, jostling his restraints absently. "In my humble opinion, friendship has to be a mutual thing. Give and take. I give him hell, he gives me hell right back. And if he hasn't asked for help with any of the shit I've put him through, then I'll be damned if I don't do the same." "So, man pride," tried Kaneko, not sure if she'd gotten it right. "And you're already damned," Akino pointed out. "You're a devil." "Not the point," grunted Issei, starting to squirm a little bit. "You guys should probably leave. Wouldn't want to get hit by the shrapnel. Are you going to flex your way out of there?" wondered Rias, who wouldn't put it past him. Rias, tutted Issei, shaking his head sadly. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it with style. That's Butchu to you. Too hard. How about Rias Butchu? It was as good as she was going to get, so Rias just sighed and told the other two to go home. After they left, she conjured a transparent red barrier to hide behind and said, "All right. Go for it." Not bothering to acknowledge her, Issei swung his legs back and forth until he flipped himself upside down, grabbing a hold of the chain with his ankles. After waiting a few moments to steady himself, he repeated the motion, this time grabbing a higher point on the chain with his hands. He repeated the process, gradually flipping himself up the chain as Rias stood slack-jawed at his gymnastic ability. Soon he ran out of room, with his feet against the ceiling and the chain hanging in several loops beneath him. Right, he nodded, psyching himself up. This worked when Vin Diesel did it. Before Rias could ask if he'd thought this through, he had already let himself fall. Her pawn spun and flipped through the air, the way the chain had been looped, causing him to occasionally be jolted to a partial stop, breaking his fall and jolting him in a different direction. When he finally ran out of chain, the force of his fall coupled with the earlier punishment caused the restraints around his chest to snap. Sharp metal ricocheted across the room as Rias squealed and ducked behind her shield. Issei landed on his hands and feet. Like a cat, he held the pose for a brief moment, before a link of chain whipped past and cut a shallow gash into his cheek. He stood, wiped it with his thumb, looked at it for a moment and absently licked it off. "Right," he said brightly, as Rias hesitantly lowered her barrier. "Shall we be off then?" It was already dark by the time they left, so none were present to watch as Issei escorted his master home. Rias shot him uncertain looks as he rambled inanely, mentally comparing what she had just witnessed with the night Issei had crashed into her apartment with a serial killer in tow. "Issei, yeah, why do you treat Yudo like you do?" He gave her a sidelong glance, raising an eyebrow. "Isn't it obvious?" "Not really." He thought for a moment, wondering how best to phrase his answer. "You know that thing he does when he's not around me. That cliché Bishonen act the fangirls love so much." "I know it. Kiba acts that way because he thinks that's how normal people act. He thinks that. How do I put this?" Issei paused thoughtfully as a look of slow horror began to creep across Ria's face. He has this image, in his head, of what an ideal young man looks and acts like. He tries to force himself into this mold to convince himself that he's the pure, gallant knight he thinks he ought to be. I realize that something happened, in his past, that is, and now he thinks he's damaged, impure. I don't know what happened and I'm not going to ask, but I know that when Kiba forgets to maintain that image and acts himself, scars and all, that's when he's happy. Ria's jaw was working soundlessly, the words refusing to come out. She said finally, "I had no idea." And another thing, Issei continued, Kiba has this disconnection with the people around him. He's fine once he's got to know them, but until then he doesn't know how to act. That's the reason he's never touched any of the girls interested in him, and also another reason for his prince persona as a barrier to people he might form bonds with. The only way he'd even notice a girl is if she was thrown into his face. Like today. Rias looked at him with wide eyes. "You're trying to set Yudo up with Tsubaki. I just set the stage for two people to stand on. Whatever happens is their fault," chuckled Issei. "And while there may be gentler methods of healing, none of them really match my style. Besides, it was hilarious. And it's not like I don't get anything from our friendship myself." "How so?" Issei's smile turned bitter. "I've had dragon eyes for as long as I can remember. I've always been stronger and faster and more energetic than anyone else around me. No one could keep up with me, not even my parents. They tried, at first, but gradually gave up. By the time I hit middle school, they had a let-him-run-free approach to raising me. I felt neglected, abandoned. I was angry with no one to be angry at, because enough of my friends had broken arms trying to copy me that I knew how much of it was my fault. It was easily the worst 3 years of my life." Rias was speechless. Of all people, Issei was the last person she would have expected this from. She wondered what it was about her, that all her servants were such lonely, desperate people. "But Kiba isn't like that," Issei continued, his countenance starting to lighten. "He keeps up, matches me, and no matter what I throw at him, he throws it right back." He is. You're equal," murmured Rias. Issei shot her a surprised look, but grinned and nodded. By this point they were outside Ria's apartment building, which still had holes in the sides from Issei's last visit. "Sorry for screwing your house up," said Issei. Even now, his face was devoid of guilt. "It's fine," responded Rias dryly. "I fixed the immediate damage with my magic, so it's still habitable." "Cool. Well, I'll just be." "Wait," said Rias, and he quickly turned back. "There's something you should know." As Issei raised an eyebrow curiously, Rias could honestly say that she had no idea how he would react to the information she was about to give him. "The murderer who killed you, the Hammerman, he's alive." The next day. "Why the hell am I here?" groused Kiba. "You're my wingman. I think you'd be far angrier if I didn't invite you than if I did. You grabbed me by the arm and stuffed me in a taxi as soon as school finished, thus saving you from the embarrassment of saying yes when I asked." Before Kiba could lie and say no, he would not have said yes. The receptionist broke in on their conversation and informed them that if they didn't tell her what they wanted within the next 10 seconds, she'd call a bouncer. "Hello," smiled Issei with uncharacteristic politeness. "We're here to see the serial killer." Behind him, Kiba facepalmed. This guy and his subtlety too. The serial killer," repeated the receptionist uncertainly. The dude with the hammer? Yes, nodded Issei. I was the one who put him here. I was also put into intensive care here for a while. Now, the room. For a solid half hour, Kiba stood behind his friend and died of shame as the pawn tried to haggle and bitch his way into his murderer's hospital room. After security was called, he finally gave in and hypnotized them, compelling an answer as to where the hammer man could be found. He was on the 4th floor, in a room with a cheerful degree of sunshine fluttering through the open window. The crushing hammer seemed much smaller now that he was reclining and unconscious. Though his frame had seemed huge before, it now seemed to fit without difficulty into the narrow bed, only his head, neck, and shoulders visible from under the sheets. He appeared to be sleeping, his long brown hair pooling around his head like a halo. Issei stood next to his bed and looked down at him for a moment, before slapping him lightly on the cheeks. "Oi, wake up, Hunga," mumbled the man unintelligibly. "Doctor, is the surgery over?" "About 100 years ago." 100. The poor, half-asleep man's eyes widened. "Then, you're a hologram?" "Yes," nodded Issei, as Kiba looked on with pity in his soul. "You fell into a coma after a second building fell on you." "Seriously? But the world, what? It died." "No," sobbed the man. "I never got to fondle that one hot nurse's boobies." Issei slapped him across the face. "The hologram slapped me." He gasped in shock. "Wait, you're real." "I never said I was a hologram," Issei blatantly lied. "I'm actually a cyborg." "Then, the world is gone. Tough luck." The man was now sobbing real tears. "No, boobies. Will you relax?" sighed Kiba. "He's obviously leading you on." With a last, pathetic snivel, the man stopped crying, looking up at Issei with wide, teary eyes. "Really? Yup. Sorry, you bastard. I actually thought I'd woken up in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Rather, I'm surprised you fell for it. I just came out of surgery. I'm drugged to the gills." Kiba watched as the man relentlessly tsukomied his best friend, who just casually laughed it off. This, he assumed, was Issei's way of getting over leftover fear. He had noticed a long time ago that Issei had a tendency to make excessive jokes when he was upset or shaken up. Being murdered and resurrected, for instance, had led to stalking their class rep to his workplace. More than anything, this was Issei coming to terms with his demons. Being the thoughtful friend he was, Kiba quietly stepped out of the room, knowing that Issei had mainly needed his support in getting there and would appreciate the privacy. 5 minutes and a liberal application of his incredibly useful hypnosis spell later, and Kiba was sitting in a dark room squirreled away within the hospital's depths, his feet propped on the desk and a pilfered bag of cheese puffs in his hand. The footage being displayed on the screens in front of him showed every inch of the hospital, allowing Kiba to spy in on his friend's conversation. The opening horseplay seemed to be done with, as they both had serious and somewhat awkward expressions on their faces. He had no idea what was being said, as the footage had no volume, but he didn't mind. Something caught his eye. One of security cams on Issei's floor showed a young man his own age walking down the corridor. His hair was short, straight and white, and he was wearing clerical clothing. His heavy coat swished to the side, and Kiba spotted a gun at his hip. He bolted from the room. "Meanwhile, thanks for telling me about this," said Issei, lifting a glass of water to the man's lips. Slowly, almost painfully, the man swallowed. "Thanks for coming to see me," he returned. "No one else has." "There's one more thing I wanted to ask you," said Issei, carefully setting down the glass. "Where did you find the hammer?" Something flickered in the man's eyes. A phantom, a specter of remembered horror. His shoulders quivered and his mouth puckered. It wasn't a hammer when I found it," he began. "It was just sitting there, in the antique shop window. An eye, sculpted from black metal. You bought it." "I did." He nodded. "I saw it, and it just seemed to call to me. So I bought it, took it home, left it on the windowsill and forgot about it." Issei frowned. "Then how did it become a hammer?" "I was at work one day, demolishing a few walls in an old clinic, when my sledgehammer broke. I hit concrete, and the head just snapped off. So I picked up the pieces, took them home wondering if I could fix them, and saw that the eye was gone. In its place was an unattached hammer head made from the same material, nearly 3 times the eye's size. I didn't question it, I didn't wonder why. I just attached it to the shaft of my old hammer, and you lost your mind," finished Issei grimly. The man teared up, but nodded. "I have one more question for you, and this is the most important one." He had to repeat himself a few times, as the poor man was still crying. "What happened to the hammer?" The reclining man gave an odd jerk, his head turning over to face the opposite wall. His face now curiously blank, he had begun to stare blankly into space. A small hole had opened up in his temple, spurts of red shooting out and onto Issei's face and chest. "A bullet wound. I know where it is," sang an enthusiastic voice. Issei slowly rose to his feet and turned to face the doorway, where the exorcist Kiba had spotted through the security cam stood with a gun still smoking between his fingers. "You didn't need to do that," said Issei quietly. "Nope," nodded Freed cheerfully. "But the unnecessary kills are always the funniest." With a roar, Issei lunged forward, the bullets of light fired at him blown away by the sudden surge of draconic aura. Just before Issei could reach him and splatter him over the walls, a shield of light poured into existence from the tip of Freed's gun. As Issei's left fist crashed into the barrier, a circle of green light appeared on the back of his hand, the sacred gear within pouring out a blanket of emerald energy. As the potent, unstable aura made contact, the barrier shattered, sending Fried skidding backwards on his heels. As Issei recovered from the punch, the window shattered behind him. A tall man with a fedora hat, a trench coat, and a pair of feathered black wings soared in, brandishing a spear of blue light at the pawn's back. There was a blur, and suddenly Kiba was there blocking the attack with his sword. Bat wings spread from his back and he surged forward, pushing the fallen angel backwards until they both fell spiraling out the window. The eyes still blazing emerald, Issei resumed his attack. Abandoning his gun, Fried began parrying the vicious strikes with his light sword. The fight spilled into the corridor at dizzying speeds and quickly turned three-dimensional as they began to bounce off the walls, floor, and ceiling in attempts to catch the other off guard. As they tore down the hallway like demented pinballs, an ancient-looking woman in nurse's scrubs ambled around the corner, pushing a trolley laden with unpleasant-looking food. His face breaking into a psychotic grin, Fried pushed off the ceiling and flung himself sword first in the nurse's direction. Issei cursed but took the bait, dashing along the floor and shielding her with his body. Exorcists had the right idea using light against devils, Issei thought, wincing as the mind-numbing agony exploded from the point where the blade pierced his shoulder. With the sword now trapped in his body, Issei flipped himself backwards, dragging Fried over the nurse's head and sending them both crashing through the window. Absently, Issei remarked to himself that he broke way too many windows. Outside, Kiba and Donasiege were locked in an intense aerial clash, the afternoon sky lighting up with sparks as the devil's sword and the fallen angel's spear bounced off one another. In terms of speed, Kiba was far superior, only the older man's greater experience and skill protecting him from the knight's omnidirectional attacks. Donasiege fought defensively, parrying the younger devil's strikes and waiting for him to drop his guard. He got his wish when Kiba attempted a weapon-breaking strike, charging from the front and putting his weight behind the blade. In a flash, a swarm of light spears formed a circle in the air around the fallen angel before firing like harpoons. Kiba barely slowed, sword moving in a blur as he used every scrap of his skill to smash the oncoming missiles, mind racing to calculate which ones would hit him and which ones he could ignore. Donasiege took advantage of his concentration and lashed out with his right foot, the kick made all the more powerful by the young devil's momentum. As Donasiege was at slightly higher elevation, the blow knocked Kiba downwards, crashing into the roof of a decrepit building neighboring the hospital. As a devil, he was naturally sturdy enough to survive, but it still disoriented him enough that he had to use his sword as a crutch to stand. "Any last words?" gloated Donasiege, creating a fresh spear as he floated lower to the roof. His back was to the hospital, so he didn't notice as Issei and Fried crashed out of the fourth-floor window. Kiba pulled a knife out of nowhere and threw it. When the fallen angel dodged, the implement sailed past his ear, accurately stabbing into Fried's shoulder. As the exorcist yelped with pain, his concentration wavered, and the blade of his light sword flickered out of existence. Free from the holy instrument, Issei twisted himself in midair and threw his opponent at Donasiege's back, both of them tumbling to the roof in a heap. Calling on instincts he didn't know he had, Issei filled his lungs with air, held it for a moment, then let fly. The exorcist and the fallen angel disappeared beneath the colossal fireball, the conflagration melting the tiles to slag and searing a hole into the building below. Issei landed unsteadily, but mostly fine, as expected of my wingman. He grinned, though it was a bit strained due to his injury. Kiba stared at the gaping wound in the building's roof. "I didn't know you could do that." "Neither did I," said Issei honestly. The inside of the building was dark and musty, as the windows were all boarded up. The only light came from the custom skylight Issei had burnt through the ceiling, forming a pool of illumination in which Issei and Kiba stood back to back. Rather than make a surprise attack, which was the smart thing to do, Fried and Donasiege simply walked slowly from the darkness, laughing in a sinister manner. It would have been a lot more imposing were it not for the amusing scorch marks on the clothes. "You see," smirked Donasiege, "I told you the devils would come looking for the hammer. You say that like it's a bad thing." "Cheer up, Fried. That chance to slaughter shitty devils at my leisure, it makes me so excited. Don't get reckless. We can't afford to fight fairly." "Are they ignoring us?" wondered Issei. "They probably think it's cool," snorted Kiba. "Assholes. They must have hit the nail on the head, because their remarks made Donasiege flush an angry red. "Philistines," he snarled, "as if plebs like you could ever understand true villainship." "Seconded," hooted Fried, who hadn't understood a word the other man had just said. "Plus, we've got a secret weapon for you to deal with." A huge figure stepped out of the darkness. The creature was quadrupedal, with gigantic hooked claws digging into the ancient floorboards. Where the creature's neck should be, it instead extended into the torso of a beautiful woman, whose most prominent feature was. "Whoa," whispered Issei, eyes wide. "Check out those bazongas." "Don't get so excited," grunted Kiba. "They're fake." Issei raised his eyebrows. "You sure?" "I'm positive." "How can you tell?" "They make sloshing noises when she moves." "Is that seriously all you have to say about the situation?" frowned Fried. "I mean, we have a stray devil with us for crying out loud." "Meh," shrugged Kiba, leaning with insulting nonchalance on his sword. "Mercenaries come from all walks of life. And besides," continued Issei cheerfully, "we have a secret weapon of our own." "You do?" blinked Donasiege. "We do," echoed Kiba skeptically. You doubt me? Not at all, said Kiba, who had learned better by this point. I just don't see what you could have possibly prepared in advance. I mean, this was a hospital visit to start with. My awesomeness transcends both logic and reason, declared Issei, as if that somehow explained everything. If something promises to be even moderately entertaining, then isn't that reason enough to go through with it? So, said Donasiege, who after the last few lines of dialogue was beginning to severely doubt that their secret weapon existed. Where is it? I'm glad you asked, shouted Issei, pumping his fist heroically. Is it a car? Is it a van? No, it's MILTAAN. As the thunderous roar split the air, the ceiling caved in, tiles and rafters flooding the room in a gray waterfall of debris. A colossal, shadowed form crashed to the ground, its powerful figure obscured by the dust. As the haze cleared, the man straightened, his wrecking ball-class muscles bulging under his tan brown skin. He was wearing a pink, frilly, feminine thing evocative of Chibai Moon, complete with white gloves and ballerina shoes. Trying to ignore what was beneath the too small skirt only drew one's gaze to his face, where two small eyes were set too far apart over a bulbous nose and bulbous lips, the hair above drawn into childish pigtails. The cross-dresser stomped one foot on the ground, flexed his arms, and roared his battle cry. NYOO. Well, said Kiba. Me. The two stooges desperately flung themselves in opposite directions as Miltan barreled towards them, tackling the surprised devil full on. She managed to rear up on her hind legs just before he hit her, the hooked claws on her front legs raking against his shoulders. Though they tore his clothing like it was paper, the flesh beneath remained unharmed, the bizarre human skin being seemingly impenetrable to her talons. As she continued to be pushed back, the devil instead used her forelegs to push off her adversary's chest, just as Miltan lunged forward for a punch. The daintily clad fist crushed all beneath it like a sand castle, erupting through the wall to destroy the room beyond, as well as the room beyond that. Having gained some ground on her opponent, the devil lifted her exposed ass and squeezed. In classic Malona style, twin jets of green liquid shot towards her foe, splattering his front and eating like acid into what they hit. It seemed the human had lost, until for the second time in the fight Miltan unleashed his battle cry. NYO. A shock wave of pure, unadulterated fighting spirit erupted from his body, blowing the lingering acid across the room. Once more the unhinged bodybuilder was unharmed by the attack, though the only shred of clothing to survive was a pair of modest white panties. You are strong, Nio, acknowledged Miltan respectfully. But no devil can win against a true magical girl, Nio. You've got to be kidding me, said Donasiege. He, Freed, Issei and Kiba were standing in a line to watch the veritable kaiju battle taking place at the other end of the room. Their fight had been temporarily forgotten by the sheer WTF of the moment. When does this even happen? On Ceres, apparently, shrugged Freed. He pulled out a transparent plastic bottle filled with cheap lemonade and took a swig. He smacked his lips, then proffered the bottle to Issei. Want some? I'm good, grunted Issei, then took a bite out of a banana he'd pulled out from somewhere. Freed clicked his tongue in annoyance, as the lemonade had been laced with holy water. Scowling, he lit himself a cigarette. Where the hell did that come from? Wondered Kiba, referring to the banana. Issei looked down at the phallic fruit for a moment, frowning in thought. I'm not sure, he admitted finally. He pulled off the skin and tossed it over his shoulder, before stuffing what remained in his mouth. By this point, Miltan was clearly dominating the fight. Both of the stray devil's forelimbs had been torn off, and she was now attempting to bite him with a huge vertical mouth that had opened along her underbelly. Despite the horrific fangs therein, she had still failed to penetrate the human's skin. With a roar, Miltan lifted her bodily over his head and hurled her across the room, skidding across the floorboards and slamming painfully into the opposite wall. For once, it managed not to shatter on impact. Are you all right? Asked Issei, suddenly appearing with his face a mask of concern. Here, drink this. Thank you. The devil groaned, before drinking the lemonade in one swig. Freed's eyes widened, and he grasped for a bottle that was no longer there. When did he? He tried to say, but only succeeded in inhaling his cigarette. Issei hopped away from the stray devil just as she started to thrash about, raising herself on her remaining legs and staggering about the room like a drugged horse, destroying everything in her path as the holy lemonade incinerated her from the inside out. You bastard, snarled Donasiege, summoning a spear of light and lunging for the pawn's back. In a blur, Kiba was there to stop him, blocking the holy weapon with a black sword. Holy Eraser, snarled the knight, and as its name was proclaimed the blade dissolved into shadow, gathering around the glowing spear and eating into it like salt on a slug. As the fallen angel staggered backward in horror, Kiba pulled a new sword out of the air, this time with a blade that glowed red. Now, prepare to burn woe. Before he could fillet the other man into scorched crow drumsticks, Kiba abruptly slipped on the banana peel Issei had left on the ground earlier. Flipping arse over eyeballs, he landed winded on his back, the demonic sword in his hand flying through the air to land in a stray pool of acid. The volatile substance promptly reacted with the sword of fire, combusting in a small explosion. Murmured Issei thoughtfully. Donasiege stood there for a moment, hardly able to believe his luck, before bursting out into villainous laughter and summoning swords of blue light to both hands. Beware, ha ha ha. You thought you could best me, corrupt one. I, who was fashioned by the Creator. I, who have survived battles uncountable. Nay, today it shall be that. Is something burning? As Kiba had made his embarrassing slip, he had actually managed a single slash that, due to his fall, had completely gone over the fallen angel's head. However, due to Donasei's tendency to dramatically spread his wings behind his head, the slash had in fact made contact. While he had failed to cut the appendages in any way, it was more than enough to set the things alight. "Rrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr wildly. Unfortunately, it only served to fan the blaze. Somebody do something. By this point, Fried had finally swallowed his cigarette. He roared. I'll kill you. Oh yeah, blinked Issei, bumping his right fist into his left palm even as the crazed exorcist charged towards him. I have a sacred gear too. The air around Rhea's only pawn ignited with red and green draconic energy. The furnace of destructive energies was so turbulent that Fried skidded backwards several yards, one arm brought up to shield his eyes. As the blast of power died down, the arm was lowered, allowing him to see what Issei had summoned. It didn't look like much, just a gauntlet of bulky red armor that went to mid-forearm and failed to cover his fingers, with a huge green gem set over his wrist. Twice critical, Issei proclaimed with a grin. Without moving from his spot, without moving into range, he delivered his best left straight. The unstoppable stream of dragon fury that hit Fried in the chest was like the rage of nature itself. Issei's ridiculous synchronization rate stopped it from actually doubling his abilities, instead multiplying it by 1 point something. But it was enough to send the exorcist crashing into Donasiege and onward into the stray devil, all three of them blown away in a tangled mass. When the smoke cleared, Issei was on the ball. Miltan, he shouted. Formation Wall of Truth. Despite having arranged no such formation beforehand, the cross-dresser responded instantly. Nio, he bellowed, slamming his fists and knees into the ground as though entrenching himself before a storm. Kiba, on it. As his wingman dashed to take cover behind the near-nude giant, Issei flipped through the air to land on Miltan's shoulders. He took a deep breath and spat out the largest fireball he could, joining Kiba in his hiding place just as it collided with the acid sacs on the stray devil's chest. The resulting explosion was straight out of a die-hard movie. The rush of heat and fire flooded the room, bursting through every available window and door before blowing the building itself to kingdom come. Bystanders ran screaming in every direction to escape from the crescendo of heat and sound, and a massive mushroom cloud of fire and smoke belched upwards like a black and orange tree. When the coast was clear, Issei was the first to emerge. While he and Kiba had been protected from harm, Miltan had taken the brunt of the assault. Though he was physically unhurt, his entire front was charred black, thankfully shielding his now naked form from view. That was great teamwork, Nio. He nodded appreciatively. A fitting conclusion to our first co-opus battle, Nio. Why do you talk like that? Grumbled Kiba. You talked just fine during the request earlier. You wrote the script, Issei pointed out. They fell into silence, observing the scorched battlefield. Eventually, one of them said, Did we get them? Minutes later, my beautiful wings, sobbed Donasiege, nursing a titanic bottle of absinthe. My glossy black blankets of loveliness. My pride and joy. Walk it off, you pussy, snorted Meidelt, perched alongside Caluana at the same table. Was it really that bad? Wondered the older woman. 2 devils and a human against our 3 best fighters. That thing, wasn't human, snarled Fried, pacing restlessly in the corner. And that one devil, with the green eyes, he's the reason we lost. His eyes flashed maniacally. I'll kill him myself. Fried, said Caluana gently. You need to calm down. Do not tell me to calm down. He screamed, and she recoiled with shock. Now, smirked Rhaenyra, finally stepping into the room. Why don't you channel that energy into something productive? She stepped aside, and a 6th person entered the room. Zelzan-san, smiled Asia, her eyes alight with innocence. I'm ready for our first mission. In canon, Issei was the weakest ever user of the boosted gear. In this, Issei is the weakest ever user of a twice critical.